Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on AXIPA's Continuing Competence Program, or CCP. I am Sharia Ali. I am the SLP advisor at AXIPA. And with us today is Cheryl Blair, who is the audiology advisor at AXIPA. Cheryl will be popping in. Oh, she's on screen now. You can see her. She might be popping in just on some slides if I've forgotten to mention something important, and she's also here to help out with questions as well. So you may be aware that last year was the first year that the new CCP was implemented, and we're very pleased to provide you with some key updates and reminders about the program today. So a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you're a frequent flyer on AXIPA webinars, you probably know all this already, but in case this is your first time at an AXIPA webinar, you'll see that your video and your mic are turned off, and they're actually going to stay off for the duration of the webinar. It's just easier for us to manage on our end with this setup. The chat's available to you for any questions or comments that you might have. Typically, I try to monitor the chat as I'm presenting and respond to questions when I see them come up. But we will also have a dedicated question period at the end of the slides if you want to wait to ask your question at the end. In red on the slide are the helplines for if you're having any technical issues. Feel free to let us know if the chat isn't available to you. You can call or email and we'll help you troubleshoot. And also please bear with us if we have any technical issues on our end. The presentation will be recorded and the slides in the recording will be available in about a week's time on AXIPA's website. So today we're going on a little tour through the highlights of the pilot of the 2022 CCP, and we're going to map out the journey into the 2023 CCP. So we'll take some stops along the way to talk about risks and supports data that we gathered from the 2022 CCP, and I'll give a very high-level review of the audit and the interview. Then we'll transition to looking ahead with some reminders about how to complete the 2023 CCP and supports that are available to you for this. So I'm presenting and I'm sort of assuming that everyone has a foundational or basic knowledge of the framework of the program, but I'll just go over it really quickly before we jump into content. So what you're probably all gearing up to do now, if you haven't already done it, is fill out the elements of the Continuing Competence Program. So when you go to renew your practice permit for next year, these three forms will pop up for you in the Continuing Competence Program. Once everyone's completed those, early next year, we will move to auditing a certain percentage of those submissions. From the audit, folks pass and they exit the CCP, or some folks may be referred on to what we call a practice assessment. Now, the practice assessment is 3 progressive stages. It starts with an interview, and then it goes to chart review, then an on-site visit. At each stage, members can pass and then exit the CCP, or they may be referred on in the process. So our first stop is the risks and supports data from the 2022 CCP. As you may remember, the CCP, and as we just talked about, CCP now includes a risks and supports profile, where we ask members to identify and reflect on the risks and supports to competent practice. So at the college, sorry, my mouse is just giving me some issues right now. Okay, fix it. As a college, we're actually really interested in looking at what you reported as your risks and supports, because there isn't currently any data that exists on risks and supports to competence specific to our profession. So you all may have made history by filling out the CCP. Congrats, and I thought we'd all be interested in the results. So first, we'll look at the risks to competence as reported by AXIPA members. So along the bottom, you're going to see the risks from the list that we developed at AXIPA as options for members to select, and the bars show the percentage of members who identified that as a risk to them. So I think it's important to mention here that at AXIPA, we can only report on the numbers that we got. We can't comment too much on causation or implications because we just haven't collected that data. So probably the piece that's jumping out to you is this one, caseload workload volume number. I was expecting this number to be high, but I wasn't expecting it to be so high. A little over 40% of members reported that this is a risk to their practice. That's a bit concerning to me. Wellness coming in at a distant second isn't surprising. I think these two probably go hand in hand, and they're speaking to what's happening in healthcare in general right now. Isolation coming in third was actually a bit of a surprise to me. Again, I can only theorize why the isolation number came back so high. It could be due to the high number of folks who left or had to leave working in public education or healthcare due to funding changes or personal reasons. But in any case, I think this statistic speaks to the importance of having peers that you can reach out to when you need to. And this confirms what we saw in the literature when we were developing the program, is that the lack of a peer network is a significant risk to practice. Oh, I was just checking the chat about the screen sharing, but it seems like it's sorted out. So next, the supports to competence as reported by members. This one I think is a bit more even. We have the top 3, 4 that are standing out from the crowd, but the crowd down here looks a bit more evenly dispersed. And these two are tied for third because the difference between them was pretty insignificant. So what we saw here again confirms our findings from the literature that access to and participating in continuing education is a major support to competence, along with having access to peers and colleagues for support. It was also great to see so many folks identify that taking care of themselves and their wellness is a support to their professional competence. So I'm just going to leave it there with just this little snippet on risks and supports. I hope it was interesting and exciting for you. We at AXLPA are looking forward to mapping trends in risks and supports as members continue to fill out the profile in the coming years. It's already beginning to inform a bit more about the general context of practice of the professions in Alberta. And if you're interested, we also have an infographic with this data on our website, and I'll show you where to find that a bit later on in the presentation. So bear with me, we're going to continue with the numbers and math portion of the presentation for just a few more slides. I'm going to share some data from the audit of the 2022 CCP, just so you can have an idea of what to expect roughly next year. So just a reminder, folks are selected for audit in 3 ways. All new registrants, folks who registered for the first time with AXLPA during the practice year, are put into the audit pool automatically. Any folks who opt out of the peer dialogue are also automatically put into the audit pool. Then we add a number of random selections of regular registrants with the goal that the total number of audits equals 20% of the total membership. So this pilot year, the 2022 pilot year, we were able to audit about 13% of the membership. But based on our experience with the pilot, I would say that 20% is well within our grasp. So that's probably what we're going to be aiming for from now on. And in the green table, you'll see what these numbers translate into in terms of actual numbers of submissions that were audited. So on this slide, you'll see the referral rates post-audit. That is the rates at which audited submissions were identified as not meeting requirements as per the scoring rubric that was in place. So just a reminder here, the audits were completed by members of the AXLPA Competence Committee and by both the SLP and audiology advisors, so Cheryl and myself. And information on referral rates is always available in the college's annual report. So there isn't much of a difference between professions in terms of referral rates to the interview. And we see that the total referral rate was 17%. So what does that rate actually mean? I think it's best to look at that rate in the context of historical data from the previous program. So when we look at the referral rates for the past 5 years, when there was data to examine, we see a 5-year average of 34.1%, which is double the rate from the 2022 pilot. To me, the lower rate is a great thing because I think maybe we were getting a lot of false positives when almost a third of members were identified as not meeting requirements. So we're happy for the baseline to go down, but I have to say a set referral rate is not something we're aiming for. We're not aiming to grade the CCP on a curve. So the rate may go up, it may go down as AXLPA and members get accustomed to the program. However, we know that we do have to find a sweet spot between identifying concerns that warrant further discussion and not being overly nitpicky. So now we have sort of an idea of what to expect. We can use that for resource planning on AXLPA's end. You can use it, I think, to not panic so much about the CCP, but we are going to monitor this rate going forward just to make sure there are no wild swings. So this graph shows the activities which were rated as not meeting requirements in that 17% of referred submissions. So we see that the majority of referred submissions had continuing education reports that didn't meet requirements, almost 75%. Peer dialogue reflection was next, where 67% of submissions didn't meet requirements, and the risk and supports profile had the lowest number of referrals, a little over 50%. So this data is interesting because in a survey that went out about members' feelings about the CCP late last year, we got a lot of feedback that folks were feeling really iffy about the risks and supports profile. But overall, what this data is telling me is that it's the CCP activity where maybe folks had the most success. And the continuing education report, which from our survey data, folks had less concerns about, seems to be the most difficult one to meet the rubric criteria on. So I think this is because a trend that we saw was that folks had difficulties really linking the education activity to their practice. Remember in your reflections, we're looking to see that the education you undertook impacted your practice. So we're really looking for specific examples of learning or changes to practice. And I'm going to talk more about this later on in the presentation. So let's look now at some of the information we gathered from the interview that was piloted in 2023. I know that these new practice assessment components are a cause of some anxiety for folks. So hopefully the more you know about the process, it can help alleviate some of the stress. So I mentioned that 17% of submissions were referred to the interview stage. In exact numbers, that was 39 submissions. Now, due to a variety of issues, including delays on approval of certain pieces of legislation by the government and technology issues, we were only able to pilot 11 interviews. So for these 11 interviews, we implemented the full standardized process, and we had a grand total of 0 people referred to the record review stage. So these system limitations, I have to mention, also meant that it was Cheryl and I, the SLP and audiology advisors, who were the ones that completed the interviews, not recruited interviewers, which is what we said was going to happen. Couldn't happen this year. But it was actually a good thing. It made clear some program needs that weren't evident before the process was actually implemented. Some of those needs included, knowing how much administrative time is actually needed to complete an interview and how mindful we needed to be of the tone of communications. So now we know what to put in the training for recruited interviewers. Now, this 0% referral rate to the record review stage, of course, meant that the later stages of the practice assessment couldn't be piloted because we had no members to pilot them on. So I think this should reinforce to you that the college isn't looking to make sure that we have people in the later stages of the practice assessment just for the sake of it. Once you meet the requirements at any stage, you're done and you can exit the process. So you might also be wondering what happened to those 28 referrals who didn't get interviewed. For fairness purposes, they've been put back into the audit pool so that their CCP submissions will be audited again sometime in the next 4 years. You may recall that being audited in 1 year takes you out of the pool for a further 4 years, but that won't happen with these 28 submissions. So we also collected some qualitative information on the interview process regarding member experience with the interview. Now, because we had a low number of folks who were interviewed, we used a survey to collect people's thoughts on the process and also made note of some of what members shared during the interview itself. So I'm pleased to report that the feedback that we got was generally very positive. Survey respondents were all satisfied or very satisfied with the pre, during, and post-interview interactions with AXLPA. And I just want to note that they did have other less positive response options available to them. And so I'm sharing this information because I really want the take-home point to be trying not to panic too much if you do find out that you have to do an interview. We really do try to make it as smooth and supportive a process as we can. And just to reinforce that point, an underlying expectation that was set out at the onset of developing this CCP was that it would be supportive and positive. And that's something that we are taking very seriously. It's not just lip service to get you to comply with the different program elements. So remember that being referred post-audit is not meant to be interpreted as a college having doubts about your competence to practice. It's meant to give you another opportunity to show that you are in fact engaging in competence promoting activities. So we fully understand that the interview can cause serious anxiety and stress, and we do try to take steps to minimize this. That includes being aware of the interviewing style, the tone of the interview, and most importantly, the power dynamic that's present when the college and institution is interacting with an individual regulated member. So looking forward, because Cheryl and I had such a good time with the interviews and how impactful we found the process, the SLP and audiology advisors will continue to participate in this stage in the future. However, we are going to go ahead and recruit some interviewers from membership to help. Given the numbers that we now know we can expect, it's going to be too much for two people to manage. So we will begin recruitment soon. So keep a lookout in your emails for messaging how to become an interviewer for the AXLPA CCP. We're also thinking about some different modalities, example, for the interview, using email rather than having to do the whole rigmarole of a virtual interview if there are only minor clarifications that are required. And the plan is still that the later stages of the practice assessment, so the record review and the on-site visit, will be implemented as needed, and work continues on finalizing those pieces. So let's look ahead now to how to complete the 2023 CCP. So the format is the same. If you completed the program last year, you would have seen 3 tabs or forms that you had to complete. They are the same. So they're shown on the slide with the general requirements for each. So for the continuing education report, you'll still have to identify at least 2 activities that you completed. Remember to identify them with enough detail so that we can find it if needed. You'll also need to provide 2 reflections on how the activities you completed impacted your competence in certain competency areas that are listed. Now, an important change that we made, and this is based on some feedback from membership, is that you can use the same competency area twice. So for example, if you took 2 different activities that both impacted your scholar competency, you can reflect on the scholar competency area twice. You don't need to try to make one activity fit into another competency area where perhaps it isn't as relevant. That would make writing the reflection harder than it needs to be. So activities, also a question I get commonly is whether the activities need to be directly related to SLP or audiology. They don't need to be. For example, you can do training just on general cultural humility, but you do need to be able to link the activity back to your professional practice. For the pair dialogue reflection, you'll need to identify an interaction with a pair and then reflect on its impact to your competence. Your pair doesn't need to be an SLP or audiologist. You can provide an approximate date of the pair dialogue, and your pair doesn't need to do anything to confirm that that dialogue actually happened. And I'll talk about some tips about filling out this section a bit later on. For risks and supports, you'll have to identify at least one risk and one support. And again, reflect on the impact of these to your competence. So we provide a list of risks and supports with definitions and examples, but feel free to use the other category if nothing's jumping out at you for what you think is a risk or a support. I noticed when I was filling it out that the risks and supports I identified can actually fit under multiple categories, multiple definitions. So just a note here, reviewers won't really be looking to judge best fit. You're not going to be dinged if someone thinks, oh, that reflection could have, might have fit better in this other category. What we're really looking for is whether the reflection indicates that you, the member, have demonstrated an awareness of the risks and supports to your practice or the practice year. So the actual forms for each of these are available to you throughout the year on your member profile when you log in on the AXIPA website. So feel free to go in and work on them anytime throughout the year. You don't have to wait now until registration opens to add information. So there are two options on the bottom. You can save for later and then go back and work on it at another time. But you have to submit. You have to click submit before you're able to renew your practice permit. So how the CCP submissions are audited also remains the same. So there is a scoring rubric for each activity. I'll show you where to find these in a minute. And not meeting the requirements on any of the rubric indicators for each activity results in not meeting requirements for the activity, and not meeting the requirements in one or more activities results in a referral to the next stage, to the interview stage. And to put in context, from the 2022 pilot, we saw that 17% of audited submissions were referred to the interview. So let's now go to the website. But before we go there, if you need help at any time, feel free to use your AXIPA advisors as a resource. Call, email us. There's also a contact us form on the website. So let's go to the website now, and I'll show you where to find CCP resources. So this is the home page of the AXIPA website. We're going to go to members, down to continuing competence program. And we've got a little spiel up there. The manual is there if you want like more technical details on each part of the program and how to complete it. The risks and supports infographic that I mentioned earlier is also down there, and hopefully in future years we'll have more of that data there. I want to point out a couple of things. So example submissions and the evaluation rubric. So the rubrics down there, it's generally the same as it was last year. But what I'm most excited about and what I think is probably the best resource are the examples for each CCP activity. And these are examples, they've been updated and they are now pulled from actual submissions from actual regulated members from the 2022 pilot. So big thank you to all the members who we contacted and they gave us consent to use parts of their submission as a resource for all of you. So take a look at those examples. I think they're really well done and they give you just the level of detail that you might need to go into. And so for each one, there are audiology and SLP examples, and we have examples for clinical and non-clinical roles as well. Another great area for resources is under the FAQs. So there are FAQs for each stage of the practice assessment, just what to expect, how to prepare for each stage. But the one that I think will be most helpful for folks right now as we're looking to fill out the CCP is this tips for success. So there are 4 of them, and we're actually going to spend some time in this presentation going through each one. But tell your friends if they're not able to attend today that these tips will probably be super helpful. So I'll close that off. And let's break down some of those tips and tricks from the handout on how to be successful filling out the CCP while I have you all here. So those tips were actually developed after the pilot audit, when we were able to see a pattern of reasons why members did or didn't meet the rubric requirements. So the first is to be sure that your written reflection really conveys that a positive change occurs. So remember that your reviewer, the only context they have is what you've written. So they really need to be able to infer after reading your reflection that there was an impact to your competence. Example, that you learned something that you could apply to practice, or that you made changes on how to do your job as a result. So I'd recommend avoiding saying things like the activity confirmed your knowledge or otherwise solidified what you were already doing, because a positive impact on competence can't really be inferred from that, because you probably have continued doing what you were doing without the activity. So I encourage you to try to identify at least one aha from the activity, or reflect on how continuing to do what you're doing positively impacts how you're able to do your job and provide competent, efficient, and safe services. Yeah, just looking at the chat, and thanks, Abby, for posting the site for others to find. So the next step is what I consider the most important, having reviewed a bunch of these submissions myself as part of the audit, and that is to be specific. So the definition of competence that we use at AXLPA is taken out of the Health Professions Act, and it includes knowledge, skills, attitude, and judgment required to provide professional services. So in your reflection on in your CCP submissions, be sure to talk about how one or more of those things was impacted specifically. For example, give examples of specific things that you learned, new skills that you're able to apply to practice, or how your professional decision-making through your attitudes and judgment have improved or are impacted. So I think the example submissions on the website are a great guide for the level of specificity. You'll see when you look at them, instead of just saying things like, my assessment skills were improved, they'll say things like, my assessment skills with this specific population or with this specific tool were improved. So that now I feel more efficient with my time, I am more confident in the accuracy of my diagnoses, or I can generate more effective goals for intervention. So I'd recommend, if you're feeling iffy, if you're not feeling confident about filling out the CCP, use those examples as a resource. And if you go look at them too, you'll see that some of them are actually quite short, but they're concise and they're to the point, and they provide all the information that's required. So you don't need to be writing a whole long essay on how each activity impacted your competence. So again, great resources, those examples, and thank you again to the folks who let us use their submissions. So another important thing to be mindful of is making sure that you're describing and reflecting on changes to your own competence. So that is, please try to avoid reflections that talk about how your engagement in a CCP activity resulted in a change to someone else's competence to practice. Because then, again, it's not apparent to the reviewer that a change to your competence occurred. And according to the rubric, we may have to look at that as, you haven't successfully met the criteria for the CCP activity. So most often we found this in the peer dialogue reflection, but also saw it in the continuing education report as well. So you can, of course, still use interactions with peers as the basis for your reflections, but remember to focus your reflection on how the interaction impacted your competence, your knowledge, skills, judgment, and attitudes. So I have a made-up example on the slide here. And the one in red talks about what the peer was able to change after the discussion with the member. So the peer was able to implement an assessment plan. How the member's competence benefited from that isn't clear. In green, though, we see a reflection that's centered on how the member actually benefited. So that is that having the discussion with a peer actually helped with their communication and their collaboration competencies, because through the conversation, they developed strategies for information sharing. So one more quick tip about just being careful with acronym use. There are some acronyms that are universally known in the profession, like SLP. But if you use one specific to your practice setting or client range, unless your reviewer works in the same context, they aren't going to know what the acronyms mean necessarily. Some of them we can look up, but this takes extra time. Also, some worksite specific ones can't be easily found on the internet. And as reviewers, then we can't actually be sure that we found what you mean or that we truly get the full context. So I've included an example that I made up again. It's based on my practice environment. When I reread it, I know what all those acronyms mean, but I'm guessing folks who work in different settings and me might have some difficulties understanding what I've written. So please remember, as general rule, type out the first term, type out the term the first time, and after that, go wild with the acronyms. So I'll go to questions in a minute, but before that, I'll ask you all to consider taking a quick survey on the webinar today. It'll take about a minute. If you have your phone handy, you can just scan the QR code to access the survey. Also, if you're not comfortable asking questions in a larger group, feel free to send your questions to Cheryl and myself via email. And so I'll leave this up so that you can access the QR code and in case I need to refer back to a slide. But I'll open it up for questions now, and I'll just review the chat really quickly. And then Cheryl, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add on any of that.
No, I thought that was very comprehensive, Sharia. Thank you. But I am here to help with answering questions.
So I'm just looking at the chat. So there's no site posted. Is that KM? I can't see who. Oh, Karen M. Can you just clarify which site you were looking for? Is it the continuing competence web page of our website? And yes, the slides will be made available and a recording of the presentation to go along with it. And so a question, if you're audited and pass right away, will you still be alerted that the audit took place? Yes, you will get a quick email just saying that you were audited and that you passed. And yeah, it's basically you can contact us for further information. Deadline for submission, I would say is a deadline for renewal, which is on December 31st.
Sharia, it's Susan here. Can I just make a comment? I think along the lines of when is this due? Just a reminder too to folks that if you want to do this well, it will take you a little bit of time. And so probably a good idea to put aside a little bit of time. And I know each person is different, so I can't give you a specific number, but I would say in my own case, as someone who also has to do continuing competence, I had to give myself a good probably 45 minutes to an hour just to make sure that I had gone through everything, that I had provided the level of detail that is being sought. And so if you think you can just fire this off kind of at the 11th hour, I think it's going to be a challenge. So just a heads up.
Yes, thanks, Susan. Everyone, that was Susan Raffet, who is the registrar at AXLPA. And yeah, it's a really good point because I actually I found that I needed to do an activity and then save it and then go do something else and then go back to another activity. So I didn't do it all in one chunk. So if you'd like to do it that way as well, like I found it, I just work better like that. So just, yeah, making sure that you have time, whether that's a whole chunk of time or just, smaller chunks to make sure that you can do it. And the question is registration CCP renewal open now? Yes, it is. So you can go ahead and log into your member profile on the AXPA website and start the renewal process. So another question about the continuing education report. So you will need to identify at least 2 activities. Is there a range that we'd like to see? No, but you will have to select activities from a listing that we've given. And I'm just going to try to go back in the slides to show you where that list of continuing education activities can be found. And then while I'm doing that, Cheryl, I don't know if you want to start thinking about the next question, which is from Melanie, who is the CEO at AXLPA, about steps taken during the audit to protect the privacy of regulated members.
Okay, Melanie, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. Basically, the Competence Committee members are helping with audit, as well as Shari and I. The audits are done blind. So the people who are in the Competence Committee and auditing a submission do not know who that member is. Do you have anything to add there, Melanie? Okay. Does that answer your question? Oh, it wasn't a question. That was Melanie giving us a cue. Is everybody having trouble hearing me, or is it just Karen? Are you having trouble hearing me, Sharia?
No, but my volume's turned all the way up. But this is the list of activities that you can select from for the continuing education report, and we aren't looking to see that certain ones are checked off. It's totally your choice what's available to you and your preference for activities. So maybe I'll just summarize because it sounds like folks were having a bit of difficulties with hearing for that question about how do we protect the privacy of regulated members during audit. And so that's something else that we take super seriously. So submissions are blinded. So the competence committee that reviews submissions, and Cheryl and me, we don't actually see we don't see the member's name. The only thing we see is a submission. You're all given a number that kind of moves with you through the process. So we never see who the member is. There's no way for the competence committee, even if they wanted to go back and find out who the member is. We also don't share information on the CCP with anyone. It all stays externally with AXLPA. The only folks who have access to that information is AXLPA staff. I'll make this bigger and respond to that other question. You do not need to submit the tracking form. What you fill out when you go to fill out the CCP in your member profile is all we need in terms of tracking. This, we originally included this just because the forms weren't open throughout the practice year last year, but now you won't need this, but I like to keep it up because it gives me the listing of activities. Oh, forgot that question. Missed that question about jurisprudence exam. So it can count, absolutely, because we see the top activity here that you can select from is college-directed activities. Example, jurisprudence education activities. So feel free, if you have to do the jurisprudence this year, to use it for your reflection in your continuing education report. So we're still open for business on questions, but if you have, if you want to talk more about like specifically about your reflection, if you're feeling iffy about something, don't hesitate to get in contact with Cheryl or me. So continuing education tracking form, you do not need to submit that. What the only thing that we're looking for is what you actually fill out on your member profile. So you don't need to send in a separate tracking form with your continuing education activities. And just put our survey information back up. So recording and slides will be available. I can answer where definitively, and that'll be on the AXIPA website. There is a section on webinars. Hang on, I'll go to it right now. So webinars and past webinars, and they will be, there's a listing of all of them. The top links take you to the YouTube channel, which is actually a recording of the presentation. And these give you, when you click here, they give you PDFs of the slides. When they'll be available, pretty soon. We usually say within a week. And I think, Mackenzie, you can respond in the chat, but we typically send a notification to members in some way, shape, or form that it's available. I think so, but Mackenzie will confirm. Yes, you can use the same risk areas as last year. The plan wasn't that we go back and check and compare each member's risks and supports that they've identified. So if something is still a risk to you, still impacting your competence, feel free to use the same one. My experience is that it did autosave my text. It's just a question about whether the website autosaves. Because I was logged out and I was really worried, but when I went back in, it was still there. That's not happening for you. Get in touch with us because that's probably a system component that we need to be made aware of. But just to be safe too, maybe be mindful of clicking that save for later button regularly. So as a wait for any more questions to come in, I just wanted to add something from my own experience when I was filling out. It's actually it was really handy for me. I actually learned a lot about my practice. So yes, someone's going to be reading your submission. Yes, we have to do it. It's a legislative requirement, but try to really see it as a tool for yourself, for your accountability, for your learning. When I did the risks and supports on Monday, I realized that there was something that I needed to stop doing. And I've, you know, been more mindful about it even now. So I think we're really onto something here with this risks and supports profile. So try to really see it as not just something you have to do, but you really use it as a tool to enhance your practice. Melanie was just confirming that we will let folks know on our social media channels when the webinar recording and slides are available. And it's also at the bottom of our monthly essentials email. Yes, so there are examples and they are under, they're on the continuing competence webpage. And so if you scroll down, example submissions and evaluation rubric. So there are examples for each activity, and they're broken up into audiology examples and SLP examples. And just to reiterate too, these examples were taken from actual member submissions from the last cycle of the CCP. So I'll put out a last call for questions, and I'll stop sharing this one. And also, just another request, if any folks run into any sort of technical hiccups with the CCP or renewal, if you can just let us know at AXLPAC, because it's probably a problem that's affecting more than one person. And if it's something that we can get on top of and fix, we would like to do that. So if you have difficulties, please let us know. So the amount of characters is fixed, unfortunately. So once you hit that limit, you're not able to type in anymore. What we found and what we've sort of tested out was that it did work. The limits that we have currently, they work to sort of give people enough space to provide the information. So I say if you're having difficulties with being concise or knowing how much information to give, those example submissions, they all fit within the character limits. So take a look at those. They can give you a good sense of how to maybe structure things or how much information is needed. I'm not seeing anyone typing, and I'm seeing that folks are sort of leaving. So just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Hopefully the process goes smoothly for all of you. Again, if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with us. That's why we're here. I think someone has a raised hand, but I'm not sure what that would be. So yeah, feel free if you'd like to log off the webinar now. But I think Cheryl and I will just hang around in case there are other questions. So I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so we'll maybe leave it there, finish up 10 minutes early. But again, thanks everyone, and good luck with your CCPs.